Hey you guys, my name is Nicole Christensen and this is The Crime Happens Here. Today we're going to be talking about the murder of Shauna Tiaffay. Excuse me if I said that name wrong. On September 29th, 2012, Shauna Tiaffay walked into her home. She was coming home alone because her daughter was with her estranged husband. A man was waiting for her inside of her home and attacked her. He bludgeoned her to death with a claw hammer. Upon examination, it appeared that Shauna had been hit 17 times. The damage was so bad and she looked so horrific that the family was not allowed to have an open casket. It would have just been too much and too traumatic for those attending her funeral. Police investigators were at a loss for a while because who would kill somebody this gruesome? It was just such a hard case for them, and it has stuck with investigators for a long time because of how sinister it was. At first, police were able to clear the husband. He had a solid alibi, but that didn't mean he didn't hire somebody to murder her, so they kind of kept him on their radar. But you know what? That's exactly what he did. George Tiaffay had his wife murdered for $5,000. So Shauna was born in Salt Lake City, Utah, and was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. She then moved from Salt Lake City to Las Vegas when she was about 28 years old. The thing that people really loved about her was she was always smiley and bubbly, and she was just really optimistic and really fun to be around. She's just a good person. She worked as a cocktail waitress at the famous Palms Hotel Casino in Las Vegas on the Strip. Many people said that she just loved to laugh and she just had a beautiful innocence about her. And the customers apparently really liked her because Shauna made over $100,000 a year because of the combination of her wages and all the tips that she would receive from her customers. It was there that she met her future husband, George. They absolutely loved each other. They fell in love pretty quickly and they just started doing everything together. They just seemed to click. They just got along. It was perfect. George was extremely charismatic and super handsome. He was the homecoming king and one of the star athletes in high school. He just seemed to be perfect, the all-American boy. George's family even called him the all-American boy, and he would send money home to his mother who was taking care of his disabled sister. His sister said he was devoted to his family and he was always willing to help people out. Okay, so George and Shauna, they were in a relationship for a year and they welcomed their beautiful daughter, Madison. They were just so in love and so happy and life was just beautiful. And a couple of years later, they decided to get married in Hawaii. People said that they were just head over heels for each other and it was just this perfect situation. It was everything that Shauna had ever dreamed about. So from the outside, they had it all together. George was really well liked and he was a firefighter, and Shauna was still really enjoying her career at Palms Hotel Casino. Both of them were trying to juggle between work, life, and parenthood. However, behind closed doors, George would be extremely critical of Shauna and tell her that she dressed like a slut. He even would say things in front of Madison, which was quite upsetting. Then George started allowing a homeless man to come into their home. He had him do some odd jobs around the house, and it made Shauna really uncomfortable to have this strange man in the house with her and her daughter. She told George that the man really creeped her out and she just didn't want him around, but George didn't listen. Many of his friends were not surprised that he befriended a homeless man because apparently this was something he did quite often. Every Thanksgiving, he would go and serve food to the homeless community. It was just something he did. His friends said that he was always just a giving and kind person, always looking for opportunities to serve. So what appeared from the outside as just this dream relationship was actually quite strained, and the couple decided to call it quits in April of 2012. Shauna moved out and found herself in a cute little townhouse. It was really hard for Shauna to admit that her relationship was over though, because nobody really wants to be in a failed marriage, and she really wanted that dream, that dream life with a husband and children, and It was just hard for her to accept that she wasn't going to get that, at least not with George and Madison. In early September 2012, Shauna's home in the Summerlin suburb of Las Vegas was broken into. It shook her up quite a bit because she ultimately just felt really violated and not safe in her own home. Several things were taken, including her wedding ring, and the assailant left behind a pair of small boxer shorts. The police were never able to find the culprits, but everybody chalked it up to a couple of rebellious teenagers. On September 29th, Shauna was shown on surveillance leaving the casino at 3 a.m. Her home is about 30 minutes away, so she left work and went back home. As she entered into her apartment, she was greeted by a strange man who was waiting for her to return. Without any hesitation, he attacked her with a hammer. She did everything she could to defend herself against the attacker. The attacker ended up actually breaking multiple fingers because she was fighting so hard. Her defensive maneuvers became futile because he ended up being able to hit her 17 times. She died from severe blunt force trauma. He didn't stop swinging until he knew that she was dead. The man quickly fled the scene without leaving behind much evidence to find his whereabouts. There was also no motive for some random attack. George was dropping off Madison, so when they arrived at the scene a few hours later at about 9 a.m., they walked into the home and were presented with just this bloody crime scene. George quickly removed Madison and he called 911 immediately. Police arrived shortly after and they started piecing together all the facts to try to make something of the case. As for most cases, the police initially started looking at George. He was the prime suspect and had the most to gain from the murder of his ex-wife. However, he had a rock-solid alibi that made it impossible for him to commit the crime. He was at work and multiple people at his fire station said that he was with them the entire time and there was no way that he would have been able to leave to attack her. He was officially removed from the suspect list. George told the police to start looking back at the burglary that happened a few weeks prior because he was certain that there was some sort of connection between the two. Police officers were less convinced but weren't going to rule out possibilities because they really had nothing to go off of yet. Investigators thought at first that maybe somebody had followed her home from the casino, but after looking at the surveillance footage, they realized that there was zero indication that somebody followed her. And the attacker was there before her, so they ruled that out. The attacker must have known her before and he was waiting for her for the sole purpose of brutally murdering her. Although they felt like really the only person who had motivation to kill Shauna was George, they knew that he just couldn't commit the crime. It was impossible. Unfortunately, the case went cold and there was no new information that led them any closer to the killer. The poor family had to just wait helplessly as the police tried to figure out who attacked Shauna. People in the community were really shaken up by the murder. It was such a cause for concern because nobody knew why she was killed, and it could have just been a random act of violence. All people knew was that a killer was somewhere out there, possibly lurking and waiting for their next victim. Many of Shauna's co-workers were concerned that the killer was targeting casino women, and they were all on edge waiting for police officers to make some sort of arrest in the case. Finally, the case got hot again when the police received an anonymous tip. According to this tip, there was a homeless man by the name of Noel Stevens who was bragging about killing a woman with a hammer. The caller wasn't sure if he was telling the truth or not, but they needed the police to know and have this information. So the person told the police that Stevens was incredibly proud of what he had done, and he said it was such a big smile on his face because apparently he got $5,000 for killing this woman. It was as if he accomplished a lofty mission that awarded him all this money. Stevens was saying how he was going to skip town and start a brand new life. The authorities immediately took this tip seriously and began investigating. They were able to locate Noel Stevens. It turned out that Noel Stevens was a handyman who previously had done some jobs for George in the past. Once approached by the police, Stevens did confess that George offered to pay him $5,000 to kill Shauna, but George even took Stevens to the local store to buy supplies. This was even backed up by video footage. The supplies that was purchased were a hammer, a ski mask, and black clothing. After learning all of this from Stevens, they went to search his campsite where he lived, and at Stevens' temporary residence, they found bloody clothing, some of Shauna's possessions, and the hammer that was used to kill Shauna. Although a huge selling point in the murder was the money, Stevens also wanted to do a favor for George. He idolized George and really looked up to him. He didn't want to disappoint him. George, on the other hand, only asked Stevens because George knew he could manipulate him. Police officers believe that Stevens suffered from low IQ and some sort of mental disability. Stevens pleaded guilty 4 months after the murder, and he was sentenced to 42 years to life in prison. This was after taking a plea deal that made it so he would have to testify against George. George's trial happened in August 2015, and he was found guilty. However, he continues to claim that he is innocent and he played no part in the murder of his ex-wife. He was ultimately sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. All right, that's it from me, you guys. Thanks for watching The Crime Happens Here. Be safe and be kind. Bye.